Now that the fun is over, I'd like to welcome everybody. This is the national headquarters of the Theosophical Society in America, and I am the Director of Public Programs. My name is John Chian Chosi, mouthful. I'm also the parking attendant, as you saw out there, and a few other things. We make do. Who's here for the first time?
Oh my God.
Marvelous. You are so welcome. So welcome. I'm so happy to see you here, and I hope it won't be the last time. Some of you may not be familiar with the Theosophical Society, but the Theosophical Society promotes study, meditation, and service, and we encourage open-minded inquiry into the world religions, philosophy, science, and the arts. And we have a deep respect for the unity of all life. Our goal is to help people explore the spiritual path so as to arrive at a deeper understanding regarding the wisdom of the ages. Furthermore, we feel that this wisdom is not limited to any one tradition, and thus we offer programs from all traditions. If you have not already done so, I do encourage you to take one of our program catalogs, the one with the green cover, and in that catalog you'll find all the programs being offered during the rest of this year. You will also find these programs listed on our website, and there you can register for those that are of special interest to you. The Theosophical Society is a membership organization, and there are benefits to being a member. And beginning this fall, this is the first lecture of the fall season of 2019, and beginning with this lecture and going forward, all members are welcome to attend all Thursday evening lectures free of charge. Now, if you attend just 12 lectures, you'll probably pay your membership fee, and then you can get all the other discounts. That being said, whether one is a member or not a member, it does not matter. Everyone is always welcome. Please come and come often. Make use of our wonderful grounds, our library and bookshop, and of course, the programs that we offer here. Now, I'm really pleased to start the fall season with this particular program this evening. And this program has been made possible in a rather complicated way. It is through the collaboration of many groups. So usually I contact the speaker and they invite them and they come. But this one is a collaborative effort. And in particular, I'm really indebted to Twyla York. And she's with the Greater Chicagoland Pagan Pride. She has helped not only coordinate all of Phyllis Curott's schedule for this next few days, but she's actually taken on quite a lot of responsibility of looking after her and being her bodyguard. It was Twyla who introduced me to Phyllis, and she has worked very hard to coordinate the many aspects of this visit. The Theosophical Society is grateful to all the people who have helped, and there are many groups. And I'd like to invite Twyla to just say a little bit about the Greater Chicagoland Pagan Pride and some of the other groups that have co-sponsored this visit.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out. Yes, my name is Twyla, and I run Greater Chicagoland Pagan Pride. We are having our one-day festival on Saturday, September 28th in Chicago. It is a free event for the community, and it's about educating the community about paganism. And we offer workshops, entertainers, vendors, as all part of that outreach for education. It is a free event to go to. All we ask is for a donation of either a non-perishable food item or a sanitary item, all of which gets donated to the Lake Street Pantry, which is by Wrigleyville. So it's definitely a wonderful event. I've been running it for 7 years, and you can learn a lot, and it's a great community. And it's through that I was able to meet Phyllis and now bring her out to all of you this evening. It wasn't just myself that brought her out. Oh, here we go. Here's all the information with it, with Pagan Pride specifically. And I also have flyers in the back available for anyone who is interested in coming out. So please, it's definitely worth it. It's fun. I've got witnesses. And this year we're a little bit smaller in a venue that was donated, but normally we've had 1,000 people out and like 70 vendors. This year it's going to be more cozy, but it's nevertheless it's still going to be magical and wonderful, and an opportunity to learn and grow as a community. I will take that soundbite. And then we had a lot of people that were part of bringing her out this evening for sponsors, and some of them are actually here in our front row this evening. Let me pull it up because I do not want to butcher names. So we have Kamala's Own, The Witch School, Your Magical Education Online, and Personal Tarot by Matt, who were our star level sponsors. I always strongly encourage people with sponsors, when you see them, shop, buy, like, share them, because not everyone is actually taking the time to sponsor people nowadays, and so it's very important to share and support people when you can back. Our other sponsors, and some of them are actually in our front row, is Tarot by Gonzalez, Gem Two Snakes, who is actually a he is a community elder as well, and a speaker who was very happy to support Phyllis. What the Fluff and Oak Moon Crafts, who are two vendors of Pagan Pride who have been there for years, as well as Eco Plume, who is actually an eco-friendly swag company. I've been working with them for a couple years with Pagan Pride, and they reached out to me asking me if they could be a part of it. So wonderful company that's donating today to help Phyllis be here. Because she's expensive.
Gets a car. No, just kidding.
We do have books for sale afterwards for her, and John will talk more about that. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you, Twyla. I wish you were working here. Just think of all the things we'd get done. How much less I would have to do. Well, so we have managed to bring our speaker here this evening and bring her to Chicago. She's doing other programs besides the ones here, but of course we're here at the Theosophical Society. I'll just read a little about Phyllis Curott. She's a pioneering spiritual teacher and one of America's first public Wiccan priestesses, an attorney, and an internationally best-selling author. She's Vice Chair Emeritus of the 2015 Parliament of World Religions, creator of the historic inaugural Women's Assembly, and drafter of the Declarations for the Dignity and Human Rights of Women, which was adopted by the 2015 World Parliament. Time, the magazine, recently published her as one of America's leading voices, and we get to hear her this evening. She is founder of the Temple Ara, the world's oldest shamanic Wiccan congregation. We are truly grateful that she has taken the time to come and spend this evening with us, and she will speak on nature's secret magic and the path to enlightenment. Please join me in welcoming Phyllis Curott.
Thank you, John. Oh, my word. I'm so excited. I have many pages of notes so that I can just sort of keep on track. For those of you who may have heard me speak before, you know that once I get going, the pages tend to fly variously about the room. But I want to start by thanking the Theosophical Society and John and Nancy Grace, who was very helpful, but not here in person, here in spirit. And of course, Twyla and all of you who really have been wonderfully kind to come out this evening. I'm truly, truly happy. I had disappeared for quite some time, and so coming back, I'm a little tiny seed, and I'm not really sure, sticking my head out of the ground, who's going to be there and what I'm going to see. So it's very gratifying. So I want to start by thanking William Judge. He was the permanent chairman of the Theosophical Congress, and he gave a number of talks, actually, and apparently as he gave them, they became increasingly popular at the very first Parliament of the World's Religions in 1893. I was not at that one, but I do have the great big book of that event. And I'm going to begin where he ended, with a very well thought of talk. It was, he said, "I conclude by calling upon you, by all that humanity holds dear, to remember what I say. Whether Christian, atheist, Jew, pagan, heathen, or theosophist, try to practice universal brotherhood, which is the universal duty of all men." Men, but that's all right. So I feel particularly welcome that he had such tremendous foresight as to include pagans and heathens. So thank you to William, and thank you very, very much. It really is an honor, and it's an incredible pleasure to be here. This talk was first conceived and began a number of years ago as a call to awakening. It followed my own awakening, and it was a harsh and painful experience. I had spent a number of years traveling around the world in a remarkable pursuit of the green man, and came home to hear the voice of the mother, and I'll speak a little bit more about that then. And what followed with the epiphany that I had from her was an awakening to the condition of the world as it is now. As she showed it to me, but more profoundly, more immediately, more perversely, the world, not as she wanted me to see it, as in fact it is, but as we had made it. And I fell into a long and severe depression in the face of what I was looking at. And so when I was ready to do what had been asked of me and to start to talk about this stuff, although I did not feel in any way up to the task or worthy of it, and still question that tremendously, I began sort of ringing the alarm bell, and I'll do a certain amount of that tonight. But it felt that that was what was necessary, that we were all in this collective trance. Part of it in denial, and part of it socially induced, and part of it, the consequence of 5,000 years of enculturation. But I think at this particular moment, certainly I would say by the size of this very welcoming group here tonight, that everybody's awake. No, all right, not everybody's awake. Let's say 60% of America is awake, and Europe signed on to the Paris Agreement. So, but the fires in the Amazon, right, and Dorian is still beyond comprehension. 18 hours more, 30 hours, fixed in one spot, 200-mile-per-hour winds obliterating that little tiny, vulnerable, innocent island. It looks like a bomb went off. Yeah? The melting glaciers. I just sold my house a year ago because I lived on the water, and I'd been there for 18 years, and the waters were much higher and flooding in the street, and it was time to go. The rising temperatures. I overdressed. I was expecting, not autumnal, I mean, that's a week away, but I certainly wasn't expecting 80 degrees, right? The rising temperature, and less visible to us because we live such privileged and urban and protected lives, which is part of what I'll talk about tonight, but the true, genuine unraveling of the web of life, which is taking place. And with the deaths of more than half of the plant and animal peoples of the planet transpiring right now. We have been informed, the report came out last year, and I think it's starting to reverberate, that we have 11 years. We have 11 years. I don't know about you, the older I get, the faster that goes. Every year flies by in the blink of an eye. So that is around the corner. You know, I'll go out for pizza and come back and realize that I have a lot more gray hair, and it'll be 11 years like that, 11 years. In 11 years, if we don't cut the greenhouse gas emission by at least a half, and actually we need to do substantively more than that, but at least in half, the consequences are dire. The planet will not be able to continue to sustain the life that took 6 billion years to create. So we have a lot to do in a very short amount of time. It's enough to induce a fetal position if you really look at it, right? I mean, if you really look at it. If it were on the news in the same measure that it should be, that we're dealing with politics, you know, that's enough to induce a fetal position. This is enough to keep you there. And it did that to me. I will be perfectly honest with you. I was in a fetal position for quite a number of years. I was in a state of high depression. And what I struggled with was, what could one person possibly do? You know, the burden of it was disproportionate. I was like a child who feels that they have to fix their parents, to save my mother. And what could one little child do by themselves? And of course, nothing, but together it is possible. And millions of tiny, small, individual actions will add up to massive change. So, not even on the political front, just on these very small, incremental things that we do on a daily basis. Used jacket. Recycle, reuse, used jacket. So rather than, I will go back to this, I'll circle back because my talks tend to be a little spiral in structure. But this is no longer a talk about waking up, although that's some of it. It's refocused. As I went over the notes from the last few years, I realized that what I wanted to do more than anything else was to try to refocus from scaring to, I know it's terrible to say that, but from scaring to caring, right? To help, to provide some measure of healing, perspective, empowerment, encouragement, wisdom, the wisdom that was shared with me, which I will talk a little bit more about, and which I tested and discovered as best I could as a lay person to be profoundly true, that there is in fact everything that we already need to make all of the changes that are required of us in this remarkably short amount of time. Everything we need to do that is already within us. It's already built into our DNA, and it is all around us. The template, the cosmic template, which is actually quite divine, is manifested. It's embodied all around us, and the guidance system is right there. So there are two approaches to finding hope and finding purpose and finding the way forward. The screen's gone, but to finding the way back home to what truly is a sacred planet. So I got that nice formal introduction. I listened to that and I go, oh, my mom would be proud, and I wish she were here to hear that. And yeah, a lot of hard work and good stuff. And who would have ever expected it? So, but let me give you a little personal, so you have a better sense of who I am, which will, I hope, help you hear what I'm saying later. So 40 years ago, when I was in law school, and don't worry, I'm not going to do the whole life history, but just this little essential part. 40 years ago, I was led by a series of really extraordinary circumstances. I was having what I now understand is a shamanic break. At the time, it made no sense. I came from a social justice-oriented family, not a religious family. I was too young for the psychedelic 60s, had utterly really missed it. I was, the flea on the end of the tail of the dog of the 60s, just, I was too young to go to Woodstock, although I begged and pleaded. And it was New York. I grew up in New York. I didn't grow up in California, so I had no framework. To this day, I can't tell you exactly why, except probably it was a reaction to an overly developed intellectual side, which is still pretty dominant. I was, very tightly trained, and I was in law school, and doesn't get more tightly trained than that. And I started to have a lot of spontaneous sort of psychic experiences, and now I understand it was a shamanic break. And I think a lot of people, frankly, have this. Most people ignore it. Probably not you all, or you wouldn't be here. But most people do. When a loved one dies is one of the most common things that you'll hear of a common experience of people having a kind of psychic breakthrough where the grandmother or the aunt will appear to them, and they know that it's real. Right? And that's a very common sort of event that happened. For me, I started having kind of precognitive flashes and dreams that came true, and I would know what somebody was thinking right before they said it, and they would say there was an objective component, which was really good, because if it had just been subjective, I would have dismissed it all or gone to a shrink, chalked it up to stress. Stress certainly had a part in it, but because it had an objective side, I did what a good rationalist would do. The law books were over here, and over here were the quantum physics books, right? And quantum physics led into consciousness, which seemed a bit peculiar to me because I was social justice and, I was going to go fight organized crime and trade unions. And, that's how you made the world a better place. What is consciousness? Didn't really make sense. And that was when I discovered Madame Blavatsky, as a matter of fact. I found the Secret Doctrine, and I read it, and I was like, I don't know what she's talking about. And off it went to the side. I did, however, go to the Theosophical Society, and they invited me to tea. And if tea had been served by the men with the women, I might have become a theosophist, in which case I wouldn't be here now. But it was all served by women, and so I was like, no, I'm a feminist. It was, 1979. I'm like, no, this isn't it. But lo and behold, because everything's connected, here I am. But a series of very interesting circumstances, which I won't belabor now, led me into friendship with a very bright, interesting young woman who was remarkable, well-educated, great job, this and that. And the only peculiar thing was that she called herself a white witch, which I chose to overlook. One day she took me to have my tarot cards read, which I had never had done before. I had just broken up with my drummer boyfriend, and I was in a state, and she said, I think you should have your cards read. And she took me to a place that was even more peculiar than that elegant little brown stone. It was a dusty old bookstore in downtown New York. And we walked in, and there were bare light bulbs hanging, and jars, huge, big jars of herbs all along one wall, and crazy looking jewelry, and lots of books down the middle. And all I could think was, it's a good thing my mother doesn't know where I am right now. And she brings me the lengths of this long, dusty, weird looking bookstore to the end, where there were very pungent, it was the oil office, and a little tiny table. She said, wait here, I'm gonna get Rhea. She disappears. And a few minutes later, there were these robes hanging on a door. Well, I didn't know it was a door. It was hanging on the wall. And they start shaking, and the wall flies open, and out comes this petite, beautiful, dark-haired, dark-skinned, Southern Italian, American Italian woman. And she's very maternal. She was probably 3 years older than I was, but she was very maternal. And she sits down, and she reads my tarot cards, and she saw things that nobody had ever seen, that I had told no one. And she knew things that were impossible to know. So I was impressed. When it was all over, at the beginning she says, what's your question? And I said, where does the path lie? Because I stopped having these experiences. I'd gone to Washington, D.C. for a while, and everything had stopped. And I wanted that experience. I didn't understand it. I didn't know what it meant. Everything I read, consciousness, okay, more to reality, quantum, there's more to reality than meets it, but nothing explained why I was having these experiences. Where's the path lie? Without hesitating, she said, it lies within. And without hesitating, I said, well, how do I get there? She said, let's read your cards. And she read my cards, and when it was all done, she said, I have a women's group, and it's meeting every week. I think you might find what you're looking for there. And I politely thanked her, and I declined, and I left. My friend said, "Are you crazy? Nobody gets invited. Don't you understand? That's a coven. You were just invited to the coven, and these are the witches of New York. Nobody gets invited." I was like, "Yeah, they're witches. Thanks, dear." No, you know. And I left, and I went about my business, being a young social justice lawyer in New York. And when my grant money ran out, I was looking for work. And I was wandering around the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where I had spent a great deal of time during that very life-changing period at the end of law school. And I was wandering around. It's all quite familiar. And I had favorites in the Egyptian collection in particular. And I found myself wandering past the Temple of Denver through glass doors, suddenly into this exquisite, beautiful garden, glassed in, that I'd never been in before. It was the American Sculpture Wing, and they had just opened it, and I didn't know it was there. And it was beautiful, papyrus and fountains and bacchantes, and it was gorgeous. Wandering through, and all of a sudden, seated right in front of me, as close as you were, as I came around this long line of statues, was a woman who had been in my dreams half a dozen times during those long months of change when I was in law school. She would appear, she was seated, bare-breasted, holding what seemed to me a book, and a crown on her head, although it was kind of obscure. And as I would very short dreams, and I always woke up from them, which is how I remembered them. Nothing ever happened. She never spoke to me. There was no interaction. She would simply appear, and there was a light at her throat. And always the same. The dream would bleach white, and I would wake up, and that was who was sitting right in front of me. Exactly. Bare-breasted, drape over her lap. Instead of a book, it was a sheaf of papers held in her left hand. A crown on her head, very unusual, which I subsequently came to understand the magical significance of, the symbols in it. And at her throat was the six-pointed star, which caught my attention right when I came downstairs, this right here. And but before I could see all of that, the room bleached extremely white. I just got very nauseous and very hot, and the next thing I knew, I was sitting in a wooden seat not too far from her, and there was a guard standing over me asking me if I wanted some water. And I couldn't look at her. I started at her toes and worked my way slowly up. And by her toes was a little golden plaque, and it said, "The Libyan Sibyl." And it had the name of the sculptor, who it turned out was an American lawyer who'd gone to Rome during that great period where a lot of artists, Americans, were going to Florence and to Rome. And there's a wonderful story about that, which I don't have time to tell you, perhaps another time. But when I ran home and got out the Oxford English Dictionary and the magnifying glass that came with it, and my glasses, because after 3 years of law school, I really had a hard time seeing, and I looked at the definition, and it said, an ancient prophetess. I looked up Sibyl. I knew it was vaguely magical, but I didn't know what it meant. It said, ancient prophetess, comma, witch. I was like, you don't have to hit me on the head with the Oxford English Dictionary. I got it. So I called my friend and I said, do you think there's any possibility? And she said, yeah, you should go. You should go right away. So I went to the least likely place in the world. The place I could never have imagined. It was not in my high school yearbook. It certainly wasn't in my law school yearbook. You know, all the stereotypes were in my head, along with, you know, Kim Novak and Samantha Stevens, and, you know, there were some positive ones, and the Good Witch of the North from The Wizard of Oz, which I compulsively made my mother read to me over and over again when I was a kid. But still, right? 500 years of bad publicity. We have green faces and warts, and, you know, and ideas of killing cats and all this crazy stuff that's 500 years. He who wins gets to rewrite history. And so we have these very distorted ideas. So it was really quite remarkable that I had the gumption to go, but the signs were obvious, so I went. There were no pointy hats. There were no green faces. There was certainly no Satan. None of that. There were a few cats, and there was definitely a cauldron. But what I found was the meaning of the word witch. And it took a while, because 40 years ago, we knew less than we know now. But we do know now. The word witch is the phonetic spelling that came about in the 1600s in England. It was the phonetic spelling of W-I-C-C-E, wicca, which is a very old Anglo-Saxon word. In fact, a 5,500-year-old Proto-Indo-European word. Proto-Indo-European was the largest language system, goes back 5,000 years, 5,500 actually. And as our European ancestors moved across the Indo-Aryan plains or into India, they finally reached the British Isles. They crossed over. The Anglo-Saxons came across, and they brought wicca, witchcraft, with them, the craft of the wise. Wicca, W-I-C-C-A, which is what's now used to refer to the spiritual practice or tradition, was actually the masculine, and wicca, W-I-C-C-E, was the feminine. And it meant a wise one, a seer of the sacred, a shaman. When you're talking about 5,500 years ago, you're talking about the shamanism of our European and African, our indigenous ancestors. And that's what this is. It took root in England and was certainly the predominant indigenous shamanic tradition of our ancestors. There are variations throughout Europe, cultural specifics, as in shamanism, that you find that there are universal practices and universal wisdom and universal revelations and understandings of the nature of the world in which we live and the worlds that we have access to, realms of spirit. But there are specific cultural overlays, right, depending on where you are. 500 years ago, a very brutal suppression began. I really look at it as the continuation of the Inquisition. When they ran out of Jews, they turned it on women, largely. It was largely a women's persecution, which is in part where this stereotype that only women are witches, that it was the women's Holocaust, in fact. And it was during that period, this is the lawyer speaking, that women lost most of their legal rights and standing. They could no longer own or inherit property. They couldn't receive an education. You couldn't go to school. You weren't allowed to learn to read or write. Women couldn't go out. The things that we worry about now in fundamentalist cultures were true in Europe at the time. Women were not allowed to go out unescorted. They were the property of husbands or brothers or fathers and traded off in marriage relationships. And there were women who had independent standing as a result, in some measure, of the Crusades. After the Crusades, that women were left with land holdings. And so this was one of the ways of securing property, because simply an accusation of witchcraft could secure the property. And you had 500 years of bad press, of accusations of witches, of the exact, it's what's quite fascinating. We don't have as much time to go into this as I would, we have no time to go into this actually, that the persecutions, the imagery, the accusations are the same that were made against Jews. So it was essentially a continuation of the accusations, and it was an obliteration of the indigenous traditions of our ancestors, what was left. And there were some residua, hiding, folklore, meshing. You find a lot of this in Italy and in Spain, where you get a kind of syncretism, and things survive in folk traditions and get adapted by the church, including the calendar. So that's what I found. And interestingly enough, at the same time that I was initiated and worked with them for 3 years, I also began working in core shamanism from the work of Michael Hunter, and saw immediately that what we were doing was essentially a modern revival of this ancient indigenous wisdom tradition. So why don't we know this? Well, we don't know this because of the persecutions, because what we did to other indigenous peoples, we did first to ourselves. And that persecution went on for 500 years. The world over, shamans have similar roles They have similar practices. They use similar techniques. It's what I now think of very much as a spiritual technology. It was wonderful to see up here that you're having a number of sessions of shamanic studies, of conversations and, I guess, practice, right? I could do this for hours, and I can't because we don't have hours. So I will try to bear down here. Shamanism is not a religion. It's a spiritual technology. Right? And it's universal. It really is universal. The core shamanic techniques are found all over the world. And they were part of our European ancestral traditions as well. As late as the 1850s, the Sami of the northern Scandinavian peoples, if they were found in possession of a drum, they would be hung. And to this day, there's anxiety about the resurgence of shamanism amongst the Lapps, the Sami. There's a central wisdom in shamanism, which is central to my practice of the craft of the wicca. And that is that all of life is sacred. All of life is sacred. There is one common reality. There is no separation between spirit and nature, between divinity and humanity, between divinity and the natural world, between humanity and nature. We are, in fact, a part of nature, which is something, I say that, and it's a completely alien concept to modern man, because that's what we've been taught, that we are, because of our consciousness, that we are, in fact, completely other. Right? But the experience through the use of spiritual technology is that all is connected and all is one. And this has got to have a familiar ring to those of you who are here as part of Theosophy. The Blavatsky quote. The opposite poles of subject and object, spirit and matter, are but aspects of the one unity in which they are synthesized. So spirit and matter are inseparable. Right? Spirit or consciousness and matter are not to be regarded as independent realities, but rather as the two facets or aspects of the absolute. It was a radical proposition at the time that she made that declaration, right? Radical. And frankly, it's just as radical now. It really is. It's radical, but it's also the most important revelation that is necessary right now. It is the most important revelation. And why? Why is that? Why is that? Because you don't, I mean, really, it's quite simple, right? I mean, I'm using logic here to argue, so please forgive me. But nonetheless, you don't destroy what you hold sacred, do you? And because we haven't held the world in which we reside, or ourselves, or each other, as sacred, and certainly not the plants and not the animals, right? Not the earth itself. We have not held it sacred, and so we are destroying it. So the scientists have their job, and the engineers have theirs. Look, I'm going through pages. I'm just skimming over the stuff that makes you want to curl up into the fetal position. Broken down into categories of depression: global crises, personal crises, social cultural crises, and they're all connected. But I cannot not mention fascism. So we've become like an unconscious horde of locusts, right? We are like an unconscious cancer. And the irony is, right, that the thing that we think makes us so special, right, that for the last 5,000 years has been the foundation for all of our cultural and our systems of philosophy and government and religion and everything else, is that we have consciousness. And so we're very special. And God gave us dominion, right? And the earth itself is inanimate matter. And what is animate, we've been given dominion over, the plants and the animals, to do with, to name and to do with. On Saturday, I'm doing an unnaming exercise, that we were given the power to name and to therefore, have control over. Now, every religious tradition also has exceptions to this, has another perspective, has a mystical core at the, that sees spirit and world as one. Right? But the predominant theologies and philosophies and cultural forms are about separation. That God is elsewhere, right? Left. And we are here with a rule book or, some prophet or other telling us, right? How to behave in the absence of God, because God is gone. Right? So here we are with rules and threats of punishment, however you look at it, from whichever Western or Eastern position. The heart of the environmental crisis and the personal one of depression and drug, and isolation and there's a name. I have a whole page here which we won't have time to talk about. It has a name. Smartphone addiction has been named nomophobia. It is the fear of being without conversation. 86% of phone users will check their device while speaking with their friends and family. The heart of the problem, I reiterate, the environmental crisis and all these concurrent problems are a reflection of a spiritual crisis, of this wounding that began 5,000 years ago, right? When we separated ourselves from the sacred, when we sent the divine elsewhere, outside of ourselves, right? And subsequently, over time, extended it into sort of the modern model of the scientific model of control, of taking things apart and using technology to control, and to manage things. So now we know, 11 years, right? It hasn't worked. The idea of this superior consciousness that is supposed to give us the right to have dominion over the world, this superior posture from which we have acted without regard to the consequences of our actions. And scientists are waking up now, climate scientists and others. Doctors are waking up now, and seeing that we have to change how we function. Car manufacturers are making electric cars. Biologists are working. We're waking up. But until we reach the spiritual crisis, until we reach the wound, that first separation, right, where we said that the world in which we lived was inanimate, not sacred, devoid of divinity, until we return into connection, right, until that moment where we realize that in fact the world that we live is the embodiment of the sacred, and that nature itself is the divine, that there is no separation between spirit and matter. Right? We will continue to suffer from I think it's what I call a malady. I mean, it's a disease. It is a dis-ease of false consciousness. We've tied on a blindfold. And it was tied on by history, by hubris, and now by habit. It's just on. And it's true for me, even though I know I see it, I know it. We live in such contained lives, such culturally contained lives. We live in a hall of mirrors. So it's incredibly difficult to break that and to break the social conditioning. We're fish that don't realize the water that we're swimming in, right? And yet at the same time, right, this whole malady of separation and superiority is not so difficult to heal. Right? As soon as the blindfold comes off, you start to see the world differently. You start to see it as sacred. So that's what I want to talk about, is how we get the blindfold off, how we become natural again, how we return to the right relationship with the earth and with the sacred and with the earth as sacred. There are essentially kind of two intertwined paths. And I'm really thrilled to be working here on Saturday because we're going to use some of the practices. Because you don't have to believe me. Right now, I'm sort of preaching at you. And it's not about believing. In contrast to the old models, it's not about believing, it's about experiencing. You don't believe in the sacred, you experience it. And the blessing of how you experience it is that it's inside of you, and it's all around us. It's as close to you as the next breath that you're going to take, which hopefully we'll get to do. Einstein. This is one of these wonderful quotes, right? Einstein, he said it best. You can't solve a problem from the same consciousness that created it. You must learn to see the world anew. And from the very beginning, it has seemed to me that it was this blindfold that had been tied on that was keeping us from seeing the sacred, from being wicca, from being wise ones, from being seers of the sacred, from being shamans. You don't have to be an adept to see this. You just have to practice. You don't have to be a witch to use the practices, just like you don't have to be Buddhist to meditate or Hindu to benefit from yoga. You don't have to be a witch, and you don't have to be a shaman to master the practices. You just have to start to breathe and sort of pay attention. I hear my mother all the time, go outside and play, go outside and play. And that's some of the wisest advice you could possibly be given. So Blavatsky talked about the hidden spiritual life that she knew was inseparable from the material world, right? And she pointed to this idea of an eternal consciousness and evolutionary soul within all things, very revolutionary, right? Rocks, stones, not, right? It was our inability to see. And so how do we see? How do we get the blindfold off? How do we begin to see what is in fact right in front of our noses? Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine, right? Because I was coming here, so I was good lawyer, did my homework. Those alone whom we call adepts, who know how to direct their mental vision and to transfer their consciousness, physical and psychic both, to other planes of being, are able to speak with authority on such subjects. If she were here, I would say you don't have to be an adept. It's an innate part of all of us. It's a capacity that everybody has. It's a question of whether or not we attend to the tasks that are necessary for us to see, to attain those other levels of consciousness. And it doesn't require hundreds of years of meditation, and you don't have to be a monk, and you don't have to deny yourself sex. Best of all. There are maybe some people do, and maybe some people should, but you don't have to be an adept. We all have this innate capacity. And I've always said there's a witch within all of us. With a spiritual technology, if you work it, it will work. One of the most important, there are many, and unfortunately the gentleman who is here left, and I would love to have had a longer conversation with him because psychotropics is one, the use of healing medicinal plants is certainly one, but that's not easy on a lot of people. You know, it's very hard on the system. We don't have the proper set and setting. We don't have a sacred context. It has long been distant from our cultures. We've lost our indigenous traditions, and you have to go and borrow those of another tradition. And there are many now medicine people who are willing to do that, but it isn't necessary. Shamanic drumming is an amazing technique. I'm your advertisement for it here. But I began using it 40 years ago. There was no teacher. It was the Brooklyn Drumming Circle. It came out of the teachings of Michael Harner before he'd started the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. We were like, yeah, let's just do it. Every week we met and we drummed. The drum was the teacher. Drumming 200 beats a minute alters the brain wave. It alters your consciousness. So you go from beta, which is what we're in right now. You might be in a little alpha because you're sort of listening to me and it has a certain effect on you. 200 beats a minute, drumming, creates a response in the brain of a theta wave. It's a longer, slower, deeper wave. It's a visionary state. It's a trance state. But you're conscious, you're aware. Unlike taking a psychotropic, which is in your system for a certain amount of time and will do the work that it's going to do, you're quite conscious. You're aware that you're lying on the floor. You may start to think, did I actually turn off the oven when I left the house? But you bring yourself back. It alters your consciousness, and in an altered state of consciousness, you are literally able to enter realms of spirit. Michael called it non-ordinary reality because he was an anthropologist, but realms of spirit. So what you are perceiving, you have an expanded perception of the additional dimensions of reality that we're normally oblivious to because we're in beta. Beta is survival. It's walk across the street, don't get hit by a car, pick the kids up after school, mostly how I'm talking to you now. That's normal day-to-day consciousness. When you shift the consciousness into theta, you're able to experience multiple dimensions. Right now, there's a theory of 13 dimensions. Okay. Because I'm looking at the clock. Entering non-ordinary reality, entering realms of spirit, you encounter beings of spirit. You encounter nature spirits. You encounter helping spirits and allies. They may take the shape of animals or plants. You may encounter a plant in your backyard and have a conversation with it. The early artistry of healing came from the shaman's ability, the shamanic ability to engage in a conversation with the natural world, with the healing plants. How do you know? They told me so. Right? How do you know? They spoke to me and they told me. Because they do. And animals will speak to you. And it's not Dr. Dula. It's mythological beings, what we call gods and goddesses, spirits of the elements. As Blavatsky was talking about, the rocks themselves, the minerals, the ground, the air, the water speak to you. And the more you do this, like the experiences that I first had when I was in law school, they have an objective component. The more you do this, the longer you do this, the more skillful you become at it, and the most profound experiences can happen at the very beginning. You don't have to have expertise. You simply have to enter. Right? As the heart opens and the mind opens and you enter the world, you are greeted by spirits who have great compassion, especially the plant peoples. They have tremendous compassion and love for us. And they're willing to help us. And all we have to do is ask, and they will help us. When you come back, one of the gifts, traditionally, shamans go for healing. They went for very practical matters, to be guided to water and where to find good hunting grounds and to make amends, to balance this world with the other, to make amends with the spirits of animals who were killed as part of a hunt, and to learn healing, to be able to diagnose a problem and to find the herbs and to know how to work with them in order to effectuate a healing. But one of the greatest gifts that was given was the gift of new eyes. Just as Einstein said, it is the gift of new sight. That when you return to this realm, you return able to see the world as it really is, to see the sacred in the world. You're able to engage in conversation with the spirits of the plants, of the animals, and most importantly, of place, the genius loci, Italian, very ancient, the spirits of the land where you live. You see the world with new eyes. And what you see is that the world in which we live embodies the sacred, that there is no separation between realms of spirit and this world. The ability to see the sacred, not just in realms of spirit, but embodied. Light, right? The old question, light, is it a particle or is it a wave? The answer is yes. Is it spirit or is it earth? The answer is yes. It is false consciousness that has prevented us from seeing what is. Right? We haven't, the thing that is our gift, it's not that we can swim underwater or fly through the air or have a nice thick fur coat to survive the winter, right? We don't have instinct, we do, but right? We've damaged instinct in service of consciousness, but we haven't learned to operate it properly. We've been operating it improperly. But operating it properly is not difficult. A number of years ago, I went to Italy and had a rather remarkable experience where one of those spirits appeared to me from realms of spirit in this world. That was very remarkable for me. I was used to encountering spirits in realms of spirit, but not seeing them here. I could see the tree as sacred, but I had not ever seen a green man. And he was photographed by one of my students standing behind me in the center of a labyrinth after I had made a silent invocation. I had told no one of this experience, and a year later when I came back to work with this group of students, I was brought over to the computer and shown this photograph in the middle of the dark of night in this candle-lit labyrinth as she clicked to try to see who was seated in the center of the labyrinth, and it was myself at that point. Behind my shoulder appeared a man. with very white features, little beard, pleasant looking, but as he came into focus, he was covered in leaves. Chest, neck, skin coming up from the leaves, shoulders, leaves, arms here, and then the hands, skin like this. He had appeared to be in the labyrinth, to make the story very short. Behind my left shoulder, I'd been afraid to turn around and look at him. And a student had walked in, and at that moment, he had disappeared. But right before he left, there was a great struggle because I was, who are you and what are you? And I could feel this presence. And there was no language. Consciousness, this is us all talk words. And there was this, and I was afraid for a moment. I've never been afraid in any encounter I've ever had. And I could feel, this effort to, we were both making this effort to find some method of knowing one another with no language. And suddenly I heard the word protect. And I thought that he was telling me not to worry, that he was a benevolent and a protective presence. A year later, I saw the photograph. I had told no one of this presence behind me, and there was the photograph. I went on a journey for quite a number of years, seeking him, and found him all over I found the Green Man all over the world, throughout Europe, down into the Middle East, the Fertile Crescent, down into Africa, off into Indonesia. He's everywhere. Part person, part plant. After a long saga, I came home and had a fever dream. Came back from Mexico after some foreseen events and very profound rituals with some native medicine people and mutual students of ours. And came home, was sitting in my little garden and was just, what do I do now? What do I do now? It's been years. And I heard the voice coming out of my fever. And it was the voice of Mother Earth. And she said, she just started talking, very formal. I'm a lawyer, so of course, right, in my language. These are my principles by which all of life is created, nourished, and sustained. All things live according to this wisdom. Only my human children have forgotten. And as a result, everything is dying. And then she sort of rattled off a few principles. I rushed inside and I got a piece of paper and I wrote things down as best I could. And it was essentially that spirit and creation are one, that the earth is our mother, that all things are interconnected and interdependent, that there is a balance in life, and that is how life is maintained, that for all that is given, something must be given in return, that nothing is wasted, that one thing is turned into something else, and that in the process of sustaining life, this energy flows back and forth in this mutual exchange. There was more. She showed me this incredible abundance, the nature of life is abundant and generous, and that is what it is by nature. And at the end, basically she said, love is the energy of life. All of life is sacred. Love, and it sort of began again, the loop began again. Spirit and creation one, and love is the energy of life. I wrote all this down, and, right, last thing. And she said to me, and now that I've shared this with you, you have to carry it into the world. And I spent many years then struggling with myself, like, who am I, and no one's going to believe me. And a long time looking to see if they were true. And instead what I found was the way that we've been living, which is the violation of everything that she had shown me. And that's when I fell into this acute depression that lasted for a very long time. And I almost died. And had a couple of little strokes, and I was just in a state of collapse and hopelessness. And in that little backyard, one day, in this great depth of my despair, I heard her again. And she said, breathe. Are you done now? Are you done now? There wasn't much left of me. I'd really ground my bones to myself, my ego, whatever, my negative ego to dust, and there was nothing left. I was a hollow reed. And she said, you are now a hollow reed. Breathe. So I was like, and she said, no, breathe. So I remembered my early yoga training, and I brought in the prana and the chi, and I remembered my early pagan Wiccan training, and exhale your sorrow. And she's like, no, don't exhale your sorrow, just breathe. And I breathed and silenced my mind and just breathed and breathe. And I exhaled, and she said, breathe. And I got calmer and quieter. And the third time she said, breathe, and I inhaled. And when I exhaled, the trees began dancing. And I heard them speaking to me. It was the green man, right? And they were very clear that we were breathing together. And they showed me what I was doing. I had been taught, exhale your tension, exhale your sorrow, exhale your garbage, right? And inhale the clean, fresh, beautiful. Trees were like, when you exhale, you are exhaling the breath of life to us. And when you inhale, you are inhaling our gift of the breath of life to you, right? And I sat there breathing. And I realized that everything that she had said to me was happening right there in the breathing. The balance, the giving and the receiving, taking no more than I needed, a full breath, and giving back exactly in kind. That every breath was a bond of life that I was participating in, utterly unconsciously, 99.9% of the time. But at any moment that I brought my consciousness back to be fully present in the moment of the breath that I was bringing in, I was receiving a gift of life from the plant people. And as I exhaled, it wasn't garbage. I existed to create carbon dioxide for the green plants. We need each other. We needed each other. Our lives depended upon one another. And done properly, we did it in a perfect, balanced way. And the divine is just as close to us as the next breath when we bring our consciousness to what is truly happening. The blindfold comes off. And we are in the presence of the sacred. We are in communion. We are not alone. We are never alone. We are always engaged in a revelation and a blessing way. So I have to stop. 5 more minutes? Can I do 5 more minutes? So now you can drum, and I highly recommend learning how. And you can journey, and you can return to this world with the ability to speak with the spirits, to know the consciousness and the sacred nature of the world in which you live, but you don't even have to do that. Because one of the things I realized was that not everybody's going to go drumming. You know, they're just simply not. They're certainly not going to take psychotropics, and I'm not recommending that you do that, but you know, it'll be this group here in this room. You will do it. But the great vast majority of people are not going to do that. Now, they might breathe in a conscious, clear way, understanding the relationship that they're engaged in as they breathe, as they drink water, as they eat food, as they live their lives. And they may begin to see that trees speak to each other and that mushrooms carry the messages. You know? They may be able to see that whales sing songs, or hear that whales sing songs across the planet that bind everything together, that all of the fish in the sea dance to. They may have the experience I had years ago of encountering a polar bear sitting on the top of his little rock formation in his cage in New York City. And we sat together, he safely on the other side of the bars. He had a long piece of ivy that he was just winding with his paws around his nose. And we sat together as the lights of Manhattan came on at dusk. And He shared his bliss with me. There are countless ways for us to experience these moments of communion in which the divine is revealing itself to us. It's as simple as spending time in nature. Literally spending time in nature, taking a walk and paying attention to what calls you. Because the trees speak, and the plants speak, and the animals speak, and the elements speak. And if we will pay attention and listen, they will speak to us. And they will reveal how the divine is present in the world. And there are many, many practices that also help us to do this. We begin to experience the world that we are living in as it truly is, as the embodiment of the sacred. It's a wisdom that unites all of the peoples of the earth, regardless of their religion, regardless of their nation. We are all children of Mother Earth. We are all living in a world that is the embodiment of the divine, and it is present to us. When we go into nature, we change. There are plenty of psychological studies now. We experience awe, and awe makes us altruistic. We stop thinking about ourselves, and we think about the greater picture. So go. Mother said, go out and play. When you are out in nature, you become a better human being. You become more natural, more organic. You allow your own processes. You're more patient, you're more tolerant, you're more generous, you're kinder. Your cortisol levels drop. You become more intuitive. You become more generous. You become more natural. You become what you already are, an embodiment of all that is sacred. The earth nourishes us in body and in soul, and one of the easiest ways to start to reconnect is by being grateful, by being present and being grateful. First air, first water, first food, and to give back in kind. Take no more than you need and give back in kind. The scientists will have to do their job, and the engineers will have to do theirs, and we're all going to have to work really hard. But the spiritual seekers are going to have to work the hardest, because all of these calamities came out of a spiritual wound. And so we have to be most mindful, most deliberate, most prepared to go forward into the healing process and to offer ourselves, to those around us who are suffering from all of these maladies of false consciousness, to help them as we heal ourselves. Then we begin to be able to heal others. There is one last thing. There's so much more besides the fact that nature is phenomenally intelligent, and it's proof of the fact that it is. So I go through all this, right? And I'm like, okay, yeah, so people will see that elephants midwife babies and that they grieve and that we have like 99% of the same DNA and all this stuff. But finally, in the end, because I'm a lawyer and because I like proof, I want to prove it to you. So I'm always looking, I'm looking for the expressions of the divine as it's embodied in nature and the practices that'll help you to experience it. To know, right, that we are supported and protected and loved unconditionally from the source out of which we were created, because that is the true condition of life. Not what we have created, but the condition of life. And I'm always looking, what's the proof? What's the proof? And finally, most recently, because this talk keeps evolving, I was shown, because I asked, if you ask, you're shown. I asked, and I was shown nature's secret magic. And lo and behold, it wasn't from a witch, and it wasn't from a shaman, right? And it wasn't from a journey, and it wasn't from a nature spirit. Although, yes, it was what I had been shown in that fever when the mother spoke to me and brought me back to myself. It was a biologist. Her name is Janine Benyus, and she gave a TED Talk, which you should watch. I think it was 2005. So I'm going to quote her here, and then I'm going to paraphrase her. She said, at the end of her talk, she'd run out of time, just like me. And she's like, okay, I gotta go. And they were like, no, it's okay. Give us the last point. And the last point is this. She is a biologist devoted to biomimicry. She studies nature to learn how human beings can do things better. Because anything we want to do, Mother Nature's already done it, and she's done it better. We heat, beat, and repeat, destroying everything in the process, creating waste and devastation. Nature doesn't do that. Nature needs to create a lens. She's got a perfect thing in your eye, perfect lens. If she needs to create a suspension bridge, she's already done it. She's done everything that we need better. Maybe not a fossil fuel burning combustion engine, but she doesn't need that because she has solar power, right? So biologists who are interested in learning from nature, the biomimicry. So this is her field. And most of it is biological and may not interest you that much, but she gets to point 12 and they're about to usher her off the stage because she's taken too long. And they let her talk and she says, okay, so this is number 12. Life. This is her. And this is the secret trick. This is the magic trick. Life creates conditions conducive to life. It builds soil, it cleans air, it cleans water. It mixes the cocktail of gases that you and I need to live. And it does that in the middle of having, I love this, great foreplay and meeting their needs, the needs of the life forms that are doing this, right? So it's not mutually exclusive. We have to find a way to meet our needs while making of this place an Eden. Okay? So, paraphrasing, what she's saying is that all living things, when taking care of themselves, and all of creation, the air, the water, right, all of it, make the world in which we all live more conducive for all life. Right? We make the world in which we live more helpful, more beneficial, better for all life, for all of creation. That's the operating principle of creation. What she told me in my fever dream. The rest of it, the balance, the reciprocity, the no waste, that's the mechanics of it. The operating principle, the inanimate, the gases, the water, the earth, right? All of it, and all of the plants and all of the animals, everything, while taking care of itself, is making the world better for all life. That's proof. Janine Benyus, biologist, finds proof of the existence of a divine world where spirit and earth are one. Because how else would you organize it, right? What could be more sacred? What greater moral compass do we need than that our actions make the world a better place for all? Not just do unto others as you would have that, no. That we think about for the first time, right, in a long time, we think about the consequences of our actions, that they should make the world a better place. And then how we go about doing that, we have a lot of work to do in 11 years. But if we heal that first wound, then and that's our job. Our job is the healing of that spiritual wound. So, and for those who resist, I say, it is better to treat the world as sacred, because in doing so, we will make it so. Okay. Thank you for the extra time.
Thank you so much, Phyllis. Marvelous. We do have time for questions, so all I ask is that you raise your hand. I'll bring you the microphone so that we can record the question as well as the answer.
Phyllis, hi. First, thank you. And two, the lady that you just referred to, the biologist, can you give her name again and spell it, and then what year, and can you pick this up on YouTube or what?
Yes, okay. So her name is Janine She's written one book, Janine, Janine, Janine Benyus, Benyus. The talk was a TED Talk. The name of it I don't remember, but that's okay, 2005. But if you put in her name, you go to TED Talks, and you put in her name, the talk will come up. She's marvelous. And
Yeah, how do you spell the last name again?
Benyus.
Benys.
Yeah. Gotta love it. It's a biologist who proves the existence of divinity and embodiment.
I had a question. I've always believed MLK's quote that the arc of the universe bends toward justice. And I feel very optimistic about that until I've started studying the research on climate and the crisis that's going on. So I don't mean to be a doggy downer here, but I'm finding it, I'm finding it very hard to feel optimistic with what I'm seeing in the world. I know there's a lot of positive signs, but do you have any advice about what we need to do? I believe in this, getting spiritual and going deep within, but it seems like we need to organize in a massive way in terms of action to counter that. So if you have any wisdom that you can impart for someone who's struggling with that, and it does affect me as well. So I did connect with you when you said that about some of those dark periods of thinking about it. So if you have any other additional wisdom or thoughts on that.
I think the greatest failing of this talk is that I have not shaped what I've been urged to shape, which is what is the call to action? What are you asking people to do? And I need to spend the next few months really looking at what that is. I'm not really comfortable saying, go do this thing, right? Because everybody's path is quite unique, and I think people do best the thing that they're called to, that reverberates for them. I think collective action is absolutely essential. I belong to a number of environmental organizations that do legal defense for the earth. The earth needs a good lawyer. I'm a lawyer. If I were young, I would be an environmental lawyer. I'd start over, and that's what I would do. So I support those organizations with my dollars. My dollars are not extensive, but I give what I can. So I think that's very important. I think you find an organization that is strategic, and accomplishing something, has a track record, and you magnify their efforts. You make it possible for them to do their work by giving them financial support. Small amounts, look at that. That's how you get presidential candidates. I think that's essential. I think acting local, thinking global and acting local is very important. And small things make a huge difference. If everybody does small things, it starts to add up. So you want to look at how you can limit your footprint, your carbon footprint. And you can't do everything, and you're going to contradict yourself. I took an airplane to get here. I'm going to take an airplane to get back. That, I don't travel as much as I used to because of that. But you look at the ways that you can do that. I'm not going to take time to do that because you can go online and get long lists of lots of things that you can do. That's important. It's extremely important to do these simple practices because they make the difference. When I start to get scared, and I get scared all the time now, I was really worried about Dorian. I have lots of friends down in that area and family, and I was worried. And it's not the last, it's the first, right? Breathing is no small thing. That's one reason I'm thrilled to do the workshop on Saturday, because we're going to do a few practices. But when I start to get that, the minute I stop, bring my mind to what is happening as I'm breathing, I become calm and connected, right? And the love that is and it is love that is flowing back and forth is creates a state of peace and determination. And I come out of it, and I would like to be speaking to 500 people, right? I would like to, right? But you start here, and I'm thrilled. Look at this, the room is full, right? If you leave here and you look in the morning with the first breath that you take and you think about what you're doing, that you're in this relationship with the green plants, it's going to make you a lot more attentive to what's happening in the Amazon. And then you're going to, the next step will be, what can I do, right? The question you're asking, what can I do? So you ask that question, then you look for an answer, and you'll find it. One of the wonderful things about sort of awakening in this way, of getting the blindfold off and seeing the world that you're living in, is your heart gets filled with a great deal of despair, but with greater measures of love, because it's constantly being given to us. The world is organized that this is how the world is working, not us, the world. So if you go to the world, literally just take a walk in nature and look around. There's so much I don't know about where I live. I'm so aware that I don't know what's going on. But when I spend even a small amount of time in my garden just observing, I'm in a kind of awe, which is making me calmer, more altruistic, more courageous, more determined. It's nourishing my soul the way it nourishes my body. And then I can look and see, what can I do? What can I do? And gratitude is probably one of the most important things, being grateful and finding ways to give back, right? Give back, whatever that is. I mean, this is one of my ways of giving back. There are others, but this is one, this is what I do. So if we all do, it will make a difference. It will make a difference. And then political activism. Vote. Get people out there. Don't not talk because you're afraid you'll offend somebody. You find the common ground. But my partner is a hunter and a gun enthusiast, but he's, quite open-minded and progressive in many ways. A lot of his friends aren't. I'm very blunt with all of them now, but I try to establish common ground first and look for ways to do that with them. One of the ways I've done it is by saying, I'm really tired of the right making me, demonizing me and making me the enemy, because I'm not. I'm your neighbor. And we have common grounds and common causes, and we have to work on them together. We used to have a system where we compromised, and we did great things in this country, and we have to learn how to do that again. And I want to do that with you. I don't want, I want to find common ground with you. And they look at me, and afterwards they tell Phil, I really enjoyed talking to her. But that's what we have to do. That's every single one of us. That's what we have to do. We have to start, because we are looking at fascism, we have to start creating common ground with the earth and with each other. Yeah. I'm going to jump down. Ooh. Better.
So over here, Phyllis, the question is, what do you see with the younger people, the newer generation? And can you speak to that with love and hope?
Those young people need to get off their phones.
Phone is taking your picture.
I never had kids, so I'm kind of bad at that. And there are ways in which they're dreadful, which is, I'm sure, what my parents said about me, although my mother and father adored me. But their only complaint was that I wasn't twins. Every generation thinks the one that's coming up next is, incomprehensible. And I'm sorry, but I do think the Beatles are better than. But anyway, I think that they've got a lot on their shoulders, and I hope they're up to the task. I worry that they're not. Some of them are, Some of them are amazing, and are way ahead of. They are where they are now is way ahead of where we were at their age. And they're the hope. Others, I think, are snowflakes, and I worry about the snowflakes, And don't say anything that offends me. And people, they gotta, get outside and play more. And I worry about people. I worry about people on their phones. Truly. That is in, and it's not good. You become more narcissistic, and it's not a healthy the attention deficit disorder. There are a lot of concomitant problems of consciousness that go with it. So that worries me. And they need to get out more. They need to get outside more. But the future's on their shoulders. We have to do everything we can to leave them the best possible future. I'm amazed by the Parkland kids, though. That's the way we were. We stopped the war, you know? So they have to stop the war at home. I think they can do it. The ones that are engaged, the ones that are active, the ones that are in touch with their conscience, and especially the ones that are in touch with what needs to be fixed, are the ones that give me the most hope. And there are a lot of new witches. It's the fastest growing spirituality in the United States. Don't get me started about them. That's okay. They'll get there.
So I have two questions, and just answer whatever you want with them. So I love what you said about, the plants want to talk with us. How do we ask plants to help us, number one? So that's more of an intimate question. And I'm really curious about your answer. The second one is, probably not one however you want to attack this one. How do you reconcile capitalism with what you're advocating?
What time is it? Let's work with the plants first. Intuition is actually, we diminish instinct and intuition, and we lift consciousness and logos. But the fact is that we have profound intuition and instinct, good instinct. And cultivating it and nourishing it is one of the ways in which to begin to listen. Right? And that can be difficult for some people, right? But it's powerful. You simply have to go and spend time outside. There's nothing that takes the place of that. You must be outside. And if it's a park, it's a park. If it's a tiny little patch of outside, if you can't, if you're not well, if you're not able, if you're living in a severely urban environment that doesn't have a park near you, almost every park, almost every city has a park, but then get a house plant. Get a house plant. I can't remember his name. Who was the fellow who did the studies that The Secret Life of Plants? Right? Yeah.
No, he did
right. That Sheldrake was the morphic field. That's not alive. That one is. You have to ask. You start by asking. No, I'm wrong. You don't start by asking. You start by offering. You start by making an offering. Water, food, water, food. And you tell it how beautiful it is. And you tell it how grateful you are for the oxygen that it's giving you. And you say, I would like to enter into a relationship with you. May I? You ask. You ask. There's a practice I love called unnaming. And I think it's a great place to start. You go outside, preferably. You can do it with a house plant, for sure. You could do it with this. And I think it would probably enjoy it. But you go, trees are good, bush, whatever. You start with that feeling of pull. You go out, you're open, and you're paying attention. And in your mind is, I would like to work with, I would like to learn from. Is there somebody who would work with me? Is there somebody willing to teach me? And you'll feel yourself attracted. You'll feel a pull. And you go and you say, I would like to work with you. Will you teach me? And you wait for it's a feeling. You might feel it here, you might feel it here, but it's quite, you might get, it's different for different people. In Italian they call it pelle d'oca. Goosebumps. Flesh of the duck. Whatever it is. And as you do this, then you'll begin to identify the physical reactions that are yours, that tell you that something, right? Or you may, the trees were one of the first things when this started for me, that I would think, and there would be no breeze, and the leaves would start. And when I do my breathing now, the breeze comes up nearby, right? And you ask, and you say, I'd like to learn. You know, what can you teach me? Unlearning, unnaming is to sit in contact with, in relationship to a tree, a bush, a river, a mountain, an animal, a butterfly, and to unname it. So you cannot use tree when you sit in front of this thing to engage with it.
So you just let it be.
Well, you let it be, but you're asking to learn from it. So the questions are, who are you? What can you teach me? Who are you? And you will begin to start to observe, and you'll begin to think, and you're thinking, but you're also receiving. At some point, you'll be able to make the distinction. And what you begin to see is the relationships right away. That's what whatever it is that you're interacting with, it will begin to show you the relationships that it exists in.
For me, it's more like details.
Details.
Like precise or really.
Home to birds. Maker of, offerer, giver of the breath of life. Shelter. Member of community. Mother might be the mother tree, because there's usually a mother tree in an area that has given birth, that has created that the trees around it are its children. There's usually a mother tree in the area. Call it the mother tree. But you can't use tree. But what it reveals to you are the relationships that it exists in. So that's right? And then you can begin to ask, what do I need to learn? This is the greatest question when I work with people in workshops and we journey or we do other practices or they go out to work with the spirits of place or to work with a tree. I always say, the question is, two questions. What do I need to know? What do I need to know? And what can I give you? What do you need from me? What do you need from me? Now, if you're not in an altered state from using drumming, then you're using intuition. But the more you do this, the stronger it grows. There are other ways. You can work with healing plants. You can literally ingest plants. There are the healing plants and the helping plants and the psychotropic plants that have a lot of teaching to do, and you can take them, but you have to be, able to take them physically. So your health, you have to be able to do that. There's a huge wave of people doing ayahuasca now because ayahuasca is offering itself as a teacher to heal people. So there's a great, maybe too much, but there's a great move down there for healing. But if you ask for something, you have to give something back. You can't just take. If you ask for something, you have to give something back. You can't just take. You can't just take. You have to give back. The capitalism thing, we don't have time. That's why you need democracy. Okay, capitalism has no moral conscience, right? It's about making money. And it has a tendency then for the moral compass to whirl. Because if it's all just about making money, and we're not attending to the consequences of our actions anyway in any other way, it's certainly not going to be then. So that's what a democracy is for. To temper that amorality.
I think you answered it before at the first question. If you ask for something, you have to give it back. I think that's all about capitalism too.
Yeah. My partner is a small businessman. We had a marina, and it was called a fishing station for 45 years, worked, oh my God, has such integrity. And so much of what he does is to give, that he does favors for, he does a favor for this guy, then that guy does a favor for him. And it is like, it's the Jeffersonian model of early democracy and small capitalism. And they treat each other with such integrity, because if you don't, then you don't survive, So small business is very different. That's very different.
I was just going to make a real quick comment on that capitalism. Reading Naomi Klein's book, this
Yes.
changes everything. does a wonderful job of why the efforts haven't worked thus far. You have to change the system of consumption first. And that's probably the best I've read recently.
Yeah, she's great. She's brilliant. Yeah. Yep. Good recommendation. That's it.
How are we doing?
Come Saturday so we can green breathe and do water blessings and make offerings and talk to the spirits of this 40-acre paradise that you have.
Yes.
I may never leave.
Excellent.
It was like 3 weeks from now, he'll be like, she's still in room 9. Somebody needs to explain to her. She's got to go.
No, thank you so much, Phyllis. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Hand of appreciation. How's that?
Thank you.
And I just want to mention, Phyllis has already mentioned it, that she is doing a Saturday workshop here. If you're interested in joining her for that workshop, it's from 10:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Please bring your own lunch. We're not providing lunch, but bring a lunch and then you can have a picnic and enjoy the grounds. The workshop is still open. We are continuing to take registrations. Just go to our website and there you can register for that if you're intending to come. Now, in addition to the workshop here, Phyllis is doing quite a number of other presentations during these couple of days. And if that's hard to read for you, don't worry about it. There is a flyer on that little table with the blue tablecloth on the way out. There is a flyer with that list of events. Please take one, and if you can, attend all of them. If you can't, definitely attend Saturdays.
And you get to do it.
She'll be doing drumming on Saturday and going into more deeper with the green breathing and actually walking through exercises and working with spirits in place.
Excellent. Much more hands-on, interactive, which is what we like. Well, I just finish up by mentioning that we do have a couple of other programs as well. It's like a busy start to this fall season. We do have a program tomorrow evening as well. It's the Kirtan Music and Chanting with Devi 2000. The Kirtan is a musical expression of love and spiritual devotion performed as a call and response chant set to music. And it creates a lot of joyful, happy faces with all the people participating. It's the first time we've done this program here with this group. If you are in the area, if you are available, and if you're not going to Phyllis's place, come for tomorrow night. And if you can't make it, we'll do it again another time. Last announcement is for Thursday next week, which will be our next lecture. And that Thursday next week, we will be having with us Andrew Harvey. And he's going to be speaking on Turn to Gold, the Divine Poetry of Kabir, a lecture which is based on his newly released book. And he will also be doing a book signing and having a workshop on that Saturday as well. And it's been a long time since Andrew Harvey has been here, so we're very excited. If you are available, if you'd like to come for the lecture or the workshop, please do. I guess I'll be seeing you every week for the rest of the year. Make me happy. But I do thank you all for coming out this evening. In spite of the threatening, what was it supposed to be, a tornado, but actually it's very pleasant out there. And of course, thank you to Phyllis and Twyla and everyone else who helped. Thank you all. Please stay and have refreshments. And, oh yes, book. We do have one book of Phyllis's. One title. We have copies of one title, sorry. We have many copies.
The other one, she's got 2 books for this one. She's got the Book of Shadows, which is her first book and the international bestseller. Her new one, Wicca May
Excellent. So if you'd like to get one of these this evening and get it autographed, you can do so. And as well, the other book you can get on Saturday. Thank you all. Have some refreshments as well.